Good morning. Mitaki api echa ya yuha lila chante washte nabe chius apelo. First of all, I greet you in the Lakota language. I recognize that I may be among relatives, and so that is appropriate for me to do so. I extend my hand to you all with a good heart and a handshake. Thank you for being here today, and especially thank you to our organizers. I think John, I'm kind of endearingly come to know them as John Squared. I'm trying to remember them in my mind, looking at John Peters and John Gaylor. Thank you so much for bearing with me and my office to be here today. The unfortunate part about this initiative is that the demands are high, and unfortunately in that respect, sometimes we aren't the best communicators, and I kind of lived up to the Indian stereotype in being here today. They heard from me that I was going to be here. They didn't hear from me after that, and then I showed up and expected coffee and expected to eat and visit. So, but I'm glad to be here. And as I looked through the room, I just instantaneously realized that I'm among practitioners. I'm among experts in the field, and that's not only something that just always humbles me, but it's something that I really value and respect, not only because of the capacity that I'm in, but also just as a young man, being from an Indian community. I grew up on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and Rosebud Indian Reservation. I'm Oglala and Sichangu Lakota. And forgive me for a lack of appropriate protocol to let you know who my people are and who my family is, but I encourage us to have those conversations, as we need to. But I apologize to my elders in that respect, those who are in the room, for standing before you and speaking in this way. I was always taught by my grandmother to take responsibility. She always said, listen, pay attention. You're going to be responsible for this at some point. And so in this capacity, having this opportunity that I have to serve the president, to serve Secretary Duncan and Secretary Salazar in this respect, it's with those values and those ways of knowing and being coming from our communities and all that we share in common that I'm engaging in this work. So with that, I especially want to thank Carol. I want to thank certainly Superintendent Hoopenthal. I mean, I know you guys are listening intently, and I know that some of our speakers are sharing today just some really powerful things. Make sure that you're communicating with them on that. And some of the things that John was saying, knowing what he is dealing with here at the state level, knowing the kinds of issues that Quentin is dealing with at the national level, those are just some really powerful things that you all need to tap into. We need you now more than ever before. When you think about those of you who have been in this for a long time, the kinds of statutes, the kind of programs that have been developed, those are among us right now. They're up in the air, quite literally. Quentin mentioned Native Class Act and how that's been, for all intents and purposes, Indian educators and tribal leaders' effort to, as our executive director tells it for NIEA, to light a match, to create a bonfire and say, everybody come here and look at this. This is what Indian country needs. This is what Indian country wants. Now the administration has its idea through the blueprint for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. We also have the Workforce Investment Act and Carl Perkins, of which all of you in this room, I would venture to guess, are impacted tremendously in your ability of resources and regulations to do the job that you are doing on behalf of our Native students. A reauthorization of ESEA is our most important priority at this moment. And when Congress is ready to act, we stand ready. to bring all of those thoughts and those ideas together. So whether it's a BIE consultation where you feel like it's not meaningful, your voice needs to be heard. In my year tenure there, I think I've seen Colin about 36 different times. He's been at every listening and learning session, he's been at every consultation, or he's sent someone instead, whether it's through the National Congress of American Indians and all the important work that they do, TEDNA, NCAI, or NIEA, AHEC. You all can contribute to that role and make sure that all these issues are communicated to where they need to go. And they need a vehicle, or more appropriately for me as a plainsman, they need a horse. And that is exactly what the President's executive order is about. Whether it's the secretaries or the President himself, they understand these are delicate matters. That even if you approach such topics at the 50-state level, it's nothing compared to 566 different tribes, 300 different languages, within 50 different states, and an even more complex system of schools from cradle to career. But we approach this in what Quentin referred to as a siloed way. We looked at it in terms of, to grossly dramatize it, the sandbox approach. This is mine over here, Title VII. This is mine, BIE schools. This is mine, tribal colleges. And that has been problematic for us. It has created, for all intents and purposes, the same kind of factionalization that inhibits our own tribal communities. You all know that dynamic that we're talking about. I grew up in Pine Ridge Village. I don't know, anybody ever been to Pine Ridge here? You kind of get the feeling that it's a small town a little bit. I was an urban Indian for all intents and purposes. I was a town kid, I was a rich kid when you thought about the students who traveled the 60 miles from the districts, the students who woke up at 5 o'clock and came in, and parents that, faced tremendous challenges compared to, what the perceptions were of Pine Ridge. And not only that, there were dynamics of tradition and culture involved in that. Those students coming in from those districts were bush Indians, buck Indians as we referred to them sometimes, in the most negative aspect. And as we were perceived, we were the apples. We were the ones that had everything and shared nothing. And even dealing with those dynamics on our reservation, they're compounding our educational aspects now. We have those same kinds of barriers and our boundaries, if you will, our jurisdictional areas of our tribes, our non-Indians contributing in the same way. And so this order is about addressing some of those jurisdictional issues. When we went out on those consultations, an unprecedented amount, 6 in 2010 on reservation lands, 4 in urban Indian listening and learning in our urban centers, 2 more at tribal colleges and universities, and then just more recently, we've done 4 tribal leader education roundtables. We have done a lot of listening and learning, as Quentin said. It's time for action. To address that factionalization, there are 3 positions in Washington, D.C. The Director of Bureau of Indian Education, held now by Director Moore, the Director of Office of Indian Education, Joyce Silverthorne, who holds that position, and myself now with the White House Initiative, formerly the White House Initiative on Tribal Colleges and Universities. And I'll get to the importance of their role in this. Those positions are critical. They're not the only ones, I mind you. We have a lot of others, not only within the BIA, but within HHS. You know these individuals. You know these positions. We need to support them. We need to hold them accountable. We need to provide them with the adequate information that they need so that they can be successful in their jobs. Because like you and like the institutions that you come from, whether it's schools or colleges, in many respects, what we know about them is that they're plagued by turnover. The average tenure of those three positions taken together is about 1.5 years at best, depending on the scope that you look at. How can we establish any sustainability under those kinds of impacts to any kind of national coherence, if you will, in federal programming? To me, that is as much a problem of the federal government to address as it is ours, from communities, from educators, to say, we need you to be successful. We need you to be making decisions with our interests in mind, and so that we can connect our successes to the resources and the support that we receive at that level. And in that context, I talk about not only the responsibility, but also the sheer effort. Because after all, we are talking about treaty responsibilities here. It's also about alignment and coordination, prioritization, and that underlying impact, tribal self-determination. And it's on this point that we really need to talk about where we're at in this point in history. And I share this sentiment with senior leaders across all the agencies, that we have tried literally everything in Indian education with the exception of involving our tribal leaders. Those in our communities who know their communities best and have a connection to the kinds of efforts that we need to have employed and aligned with the work of educators. Our educators have for, the past 75 years, if you will, 40 years arguably, certainly, have carried the mantle, have created systems of sustainability that are unprecedented for our communities. They have been the answer to revitalization of our own self-determination and self-governance. In their leadership, through tribal colleges and universities and the emerging role of tribal education agencies, we've doubled the graduation rate. We've increased our retention. And so we have a lot of positives among our efforts and our sincere challenges that we do face still yet. But we are not going to push it over the edge and impact this the way that we need to, with full force and weight, without the help of tribal leaders. And it's pretty funny, this topic. I still sometimes express frustration about our educators and our tribal leaders and the misinformation that exists between the two. Because every time I have this conversation, if I'm in front of tribal leaders, they say, we don't know what's going on in those schools. We can come to Washington, D.C., we can get an audience with the Secretary of Education, we can sit down with the President of the United States, and we can't even meet with our own school board. The principal won't even return my call. Not to mention the teacher. We can help, they say. We want to do something about it. And we ask them the tough questions too. How much of your budget is designated to funding? How do you know that your higher education scholarships are effective? Tell me about quality practices and quality instruction and leadership within your Head Start programs. Tell me about fiscal responsibility. And then when we talk to educators, we hear the same thing. High indirect cost rates. My tribe's credit rating is worse than my 21-year-olds. Don't give those tribes that money. they're gonna mess it all up. Instead of the principal's wife, they're gonna hire the tribal president's wife. We need to fix our own tribal governments. If we don't like how they're structured, and believe me, I know this, I come from an IRA government in Pine Ridge. I come from the place where there's a clear line separating formal and informal leadership. How then are we supporting those systems is critical. We need tribal leaders to be engaged in this because they make the decisions when it comes time to prioritizing resources. That is the most stark realization as an educator coming from the field to Washington, D.C., that we need education to be number one on their priority lists among all those which you would agree are as critical: health, justice, land, economic development. In my opinion, as an educator, they're all downstream to our education system. We can fix all those with the right tools and the right support. Quentin mentioned the Tribal Education Agency pilot, as we refer to as the STEP pilot, taking quite literally those responsible steps in a direction to recognizing the role of tribal sovereignty. As one of our policy directors for NCI said, tribes never relinquished the right of education. It was taken from them in many respects. And at best, it was a partnership between the federal government and tribes. Tribes are ready. Tribes need to be supported, and that's what this pilot is about. The Secretary's vision for implementing this is one that's going to carry forward and that we're going to support. In the initiative and how we implement these goals, we're going to be looking at grants, contracts, loans, everything from services to technical assistance. In my work, the way that we approach this is, okay, if we can't have a designated program, then where's the set-aside for tribes and tribal education? Where is the competitive preference? Where is the invitational preference? Where is the technical assistance? And we scale it down to, well, give me an IOU then. This is critical. We, for the first time through the President's initiative, will be able to employ an interagency working group dedicated to these goals, establishing the mechanisms that can drive continuity on a regular basis, employing implementation teams within each of the federal agencies to advance the 7 objectives and anything else that we deem priority for Indian education. As I mentioned, we've had that siloed approach. We haven't been able to tell the story that we need to. And one thing that you all know and has been validated through consultation, and we're going to be studying and aligning both the achievement and the outcome measures around that, is that 90% of our students across the nation as a whole, so that means it's worse in some areas, are attending schools that tribal leaders, educators included in that, feel like they lack a meaningful role in the education of those students. And 10% are in schools that even though we arguably have a presence and control those, and I'm talking about Bureau of Indian Education operated, tribal grant and contract schools, parochial schools, and tribal colleges and universities, we see tremendous concern in those areas as well, as if we look at it through outcomes and growth and gain. And so we have to have our kitchen table. Where are we going to have those difficult conversations? And it's forums just like this that are going to create those kinds of solutions that will have the answers to address this at the national level. You'll have the privilege and honor to be addressed by one of our towering leaders, Superintendent Juneau, this afternoon, and what Indian Education for All has meant to Montana and how much challenges still face them. As you know all too well from the classroom or your school. There's no silver bullet to any of this. It's going to take all of us working together to build this initiative. And we're going to need you to tap into that initiative. Find yourself in it. Find something that you care about, because quite honestly, when we wrote this, we wrote it so that we can drive an entire war party through it. Every aspect of this initiative touches on something that you care about in Indian education. You can create a tie to it. And if it's not there, we'll have our strategic objectives to be able to plug it into. We need to hear from you in the building of this initiative in the next year. And this is the critical work that is before us. I know that we're here to talk about dropouts and the challenges facing them. And as much as you, I'm excited to, in these next couple of days, experience all the expertise that's in this room. I'm excited to hear from you what the new realities are. Every time I go into the field, I'm hearing something that has a little bit of a twist on there that could change some of the advice and recommendations that I make to the Secretary, to our senior leaders, to Secretary Salazar. And so I ask you that you push me hard. Tell me how it is. Follow up. Hold me accountable. I fully expect to stand before you in a year's time when we're following up on everything that comes out of this conversation, and I tell you how we're addressing everything that I talked about you today in terms of how we're going to be approaching this. And like you, when I think about dropouts, I invoke students. Whether they were saved by my own accord or lost by my own accord, or a combination of efforts. And I think about this one student that I was teaching. And he never come to class. And I'd see him in the hall, and as we do as teachers, as we do as educational leaders, we try to find that humor or try to get that hook to get him in, And I knew he liked horses. So he would walk by, and every time he'd walk by, and he was a cool guy too. Good-looking boy. Good-looking beyond his own knowledge. Just reminded me of some of our ancestors. And so I'd ride my horse, and just to raise Cain with him, I'd ride my horse because I knew he loved horses. He was known for it, far and wide. And one time he didn't come for a long time. So I knew his mom, and I got him back into school just to come in. And he came to my class. And he was having a particularly hard day. Teacher had, dumped a lot of work on him, all these back assignments and, attitude on top of it that just, wasn't welcoming to him. He found out bad news that he couldn't participate in one of the key activities that he liked. And so we were talking there, and just as we were talking, this teacher came in and basically chewed him out in front of me. Started in on him. And you could see him just instantaneously. We had gotten him to a point of, okay, take the hardest thing, start with that. We're going to have a plan, and the conversation was going good. And instantaneously, I could see him shriveling up in front of me. And then, she proceeded to ask, what are you going to do about this? How are you going to fix this? And you could see the anger kind of building up inside of him. And he said, he kind of looked up and he said, you're not saying anything to me that means anything. He said, I'm here because I have to be here. I'm trying to think of how he said it. He said, I can learn more from my horse and on the back of my horse than you can ever teach me in this school. And he got up, and with all the defiance of I don't know what, he walked out of that classroom. And sad to say, he never did come back. I think he came back, maybe in the fall later, as I heard. But he's pretty much living his life on the back of his horse. And in some respects, he's gone awry. I heard recently that there's a horse gang back home terrorizing the neighbors, breaking into houses, running rival groups over with their horses. And so simultaneously there exists kind of a conundrum there, if you will. All of the positive of what they know that they have a connection to, utilized in negative ways. And of course, the blatant failure of us to reach that student in a way that's meaningful to them. And I don't have the answers. I didn't have them then. I don't have them now. But that's kind of the simultaneous pain and hope and inspiration that I carry with me. And so I just wanted to share that with you this morning and provide you with all the encouragements. It is a thankless job that you do. There is no riches and fame and glory in the work that you do. And I want to applaud your courage and your strength for taking the time out of your busy schedules to leave your students, to leave your teachers, to leave the work that you do, to be here to contribute to these conversations. Thank you for your efforts, and thank you.